Jim, tell us about these protests.
Well, it starts a week ago, Monday, April 13th, kind of out of the blue, seemingly. Here is a group of protesters show up in Columbus, Ohio, and demand that Governor DeWine, Republican governor, who's imposed very strict stay-at-home restrictions, they're demanding reopen the state, reopen the economy, let's get back to work. The next day, there's another rally, this time with the same demands in North Carolina, in Raleigh, and this time the protest results in an arrest. Then the next day, you have a very big protest, the biggest protest in Michigan, and this one is the biggest one we'd seen, called Operation Gridlock. It's on Friday.
In Minnesota, the demonstrators didn't even wait for their own planned protest for today.
During a Fox News segment about the protest, this one in Minnesota,
in St. Paul yesterday,
we started to see some tweets from the President of the United States.
So this is the president openly encouraging these protests.
He's taken himself right to the front of the line. We start wondering, how is this all coming together? Certainly a movement, but all movements have organizational structures. What's going on here? As we often find, it was complicated. There were many tentacles from Washington leading into these various state protests, basically driven by people whose main concern probably isn't solely whether you can go to the store tomorrow and buy some grass seed. The good news for us was at first we didn't have to do a ton of digging. It was right there in plain sight in Michigan. It turned out that one of the big groups that helped organize the protests, promote the protest, even speak for the protest was called Michigan Freedom Fund. And Michigan Freedom Fund has as its chairman a gentleman named Greg McNeely. It turns out Greg McNeely is very close to a big conservative family in Michigan that donates to a lot of conservative causes, the DeVos family. That family's activism in Michigan, especially around charter schools, is what led President Trump to hire one of them, Betsy DeVos, to be his education secretary. This is a connection to the White House right there out in the open. Of course, Mr. McNeely said he was not coordinating with the White House, but the connections were right there in plain sight, and it really intrigued a lot of us. Then we started looking at some of the Facebook posts for Operation Gridlocks, and we noticed that the language for a lot of these promotions for them on Facebook is exactly the same. You know, obviously coming from the same place. Then we get out of the blue call from a progressive group called True North, and they found a fascinating little clip from YouTube.
We can talk public policy and drink at the same time.
A tiny YouTube show. There are 300 views on this thing.
We decided to call up our old friend, Steve Moore, who's at home. Steve, how are you?
So did the Gazette take you back?
No.
And it's Stephen Moore, a longtime conservative activist, a one-time potential nominee for President Trump to the Fed board, and a close sort of economic advisor to Trump from the outside. And he says, I'm working with the group to organize a protest in Wisconsin.
This is great. We have one big donor in Wisconsin.
And I've even got a donor lined up who's ready to pay the legal fees of anyone who gets arrested.
So this is a great time, gentlemen and ladies, for civil disobedience. We need to be the Rosa Parks here and protest against these government injustices.
These are the modern day Rosa Parks fighting for freedom and liberty. He says this on April 14th. Well, that was an important day for Stephen Moore because he was also named that very same day to a presidential commission about reopening the economy, President Trump's sort of task force. Then we started looking at what Stephen Moore had been up to over the past couple of weeks, and it turned out that he was working with a couple of other groups to pressure the White House to open the economy sooner. Now, two of those groups were called Freedom Works and ALEC. And those groups have been major players in the old Tea Party movement. Freedom Works had initially been founded with help from the billionaire Koch brothers, so it had big billionaire donors behind it. The next step is Ken Vogel, my colleague who's written a lot about these donors and these issues, finds that Freedom Works has itself been directly involved in helping to organize some of these reopen government protests. And then finally, it comes to our attention that a big law firm has come to the defense of a protester arrested in Raleigh. This firm is called Michael Best, and wouldn't you know it, this firm is very closely tied to the White House. It has, among its ranks, Reince Priebus, the former RNC chief and Trump White House chief of staff. It has a lawyer who's currently helping the Trump organization fend off requests from Congress for its tax information. And then it has an attorney who's currently, right now, working as a special counsel to President Trump's campaign. This firm just couldn't be more closely connected to the president. We spoke to the partner there in North Carolina who said there was no coordination here, but again, an uncanny connection to President Trump. So what we don't have reporting, at least as of right now, showing that somehow this was a top-down, the White House has concocted this plot to create these protests that help the president. What we do have is people connected to the White House, at least in Mr. Moore's case, directly working with the White House, are helping these protests along, stoking them, providing them the financial wherewithal where they see they need it. Just these tentacles that kind of go to the president and to these major conservative groups that have long been on the scene trying to push against big government.